Hey,
Do we know who else is joining us today?
yeah, Vincent is going to come in. He's facilitating. Besides that, I have no idea. Aha, hi Morgan. You are muted. Yeah, Vincent should be jumping in. I can ping him in just a second.
Cool.
Christina, did you watch the interview?
Yeah, I did. It's helpful. It was good to hear that she confirmed some of the things that we thought.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, Vincent. Hey, dude.
Can you hear me?
There you go. Yeah, what's up? How are y'all doing?
Awful. It's like I'm a remote student being remote all the time. Ugh.
I, I contacted a friend of mine today. I was like, "Hey man, how are you doing? Like, how are you in this existential crisis?" He's like, "Thriving. I don't want to see anyone anyway. All I want to do is be at home."
That is a fucking dream, I guess. But at the same time, I'm just like, if it would be different if I couldn't. I think it's different now because I can't go to coffee shops, and I can't like be social, antisocial, but social, if that makes sense. But
Yeah,
now I'm forced to be like confined, so it's a bit difficult. But
it is.
That's what I said earlier. I think it's also the idea that you can't do stuff is way worse than like making the decision not to do those things.
Yeah.
Like I never really wanted to go out to like bars or clubs or whatever, but now that I can, I'm sort of like, it would be really great. I could go out and get a drink with my friends.
Yeah.
guys,
Also, like exercise. I mean, I've gone for a run. I know, like, it's not like front. You can still go running, but I've definitely been working on like my prison yard exercise routine. Just like push-ups, burpees, just like lifting water jugs just for the sake of it. I'll have weights, but just like lifting water is just more gangster, I
That's exactly what the athletic department told us to do, actually. They sent us workout packets with gallons of water and milk. That's
Damn,
what we're supposed to do.
thug life.
man, so awful.
Yeah. Okay, Vincent, you selected today's article.
Yeah, I am trying to pull it up. For some reason, my iPad is like not bringing up the file that I had highlighted with everything.
Okay.
So that's shitty. But yeah, I'm not sure how you guys start these things. My first one was only the last one. But what I wanted to do was from last week's discussion about kind of the disability realm and being like user-centered design and bringing these experiences to people with disabilities, right? The idea that we're creating these things for them so they can experience what we create. But it kind of sent me in this weird spiral of like, okay, well, there must be some sort of like, I guess, emotional connection. And I found the perfect paper that kind of like touches the surface level of it. I don't think it goes too much into the detail, in my opinion,
Hmm.
but it was just an interesting, I think, thought process starter or conversational starter. So just wanted to continue that kind of thought process along for this week. So excited to hear what you guys think.
Sure. Did you need some more time to pull up the article, or do you want me to share it?
Yeah, if you can share, that'd be great. My iPad's not cooperating.
No problem. Okay. Um, so yeah, user-centered design. emotion as an element for innovation in assistive technology. Um, I highlighted some stuff. One thing I really thought about that I was wondering what you guys are thinking. It's kind of like also very applicable to today's day and age. Was this section about style and aesthetics, and how they say like you have to have. They suggested that you have someone focus on aesthetics throughout the whole process, partially because they say that something non-appealing can actually perpetuate the stigma of having a disability, and so that it's almost equally as important as the function. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, or maybe you guys got a different reading out of it. But I was thinking, like, what does that mean for teams now? And like now that we're in this like remote space, like, is there a proper time? If you can't have a team there, here, let me back up. If you have a designer focusing on at aesthetics throughout the whole process, that's their dedicated job, that's going to up your cost of development significantly. So does that mean that the person that's contributing to aesthetics has to be a multi-talented person? Does that mean that they are going to have, like, if you only have a small team and you have to like sacrifice one or the other, does that mean that we're going to have a place in time where only some people are injected in short periods of time of the development cycle if we can't do that? And then what does this contracted life look like?
So I think this is something I think a lot about, because I think too many assistive devices look medical. They look like you went into a hospital and you came out with this thing and you're stuck with it for the rest of your life. And that is really stigmatizing for especially, I think, young people who grow up with an assistive device, whether that's a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, or a wheelchair or canes, or, they're part of you. They're part of your identity. They're part of your aesthetic. They're part of your style. They're part of your way of self-expression. And I don't think we give enough opportunity for most assistive devices to be like that. Like if you Google, decorative canes or whatever, either they're purely decorative or they're purely medical, and you don't get a lot in the in between. And I think the one assistive device that's been able to make that jump is eyeglasses, to the point where now people wear them even if they don't need them because they like how they look.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of assistive devices could use going down that route of, well, okay, we understand what the function of this thing needs to be. We understand how it needs to be built, but how do we get people to, one, use them, and then two, not feel embarrassed or ashamed or stigmatized for using them. And I think when they're talking about style being part of the process, it's more like you should start the process with a vision of the aesthetics of the end product and then develop with that in mind, versus, I think, necessarily having someone that's just there to keep the aesthetics on track, if that makes sense.
See, I think it's interesting because a lot of this UI UX kind of thing is primarily for people to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we think about these experiences that we're designing, and this entire paper, the thing that I got out of it was more so about how the emotional connection between the things that we have play into our choices, right? And they're mostly visual. Like when you look at your apps that you use, you look at your home, you look at, down to the toilet, there's a visual design and appeal to it. And those experiences are made exclusively for us who are bipedal, able to move fluidly, whatever that means, and have two eyes and can smell and touch, like all that stuff. So what I took from this paper was more so like there is a need, a niche to create these custom experiences directly for the people that need them, right? Like there, in my mind, there are far too few people who identify as being disabled or whatever the term is as designers, right? Because they're not necessarily the first ones we go to create design experiences, even though we're creating the experiences for them, right? So there's a weird emotional connection because it could be ugly visually, but we're designing it because we think that's what they want, right? Or we associate it based on their limitations, whatever they are. So there's just kind of this weird like hit or miss scenario planning that we're doing when we design products. But I'm thinking now it's more so like, well, if we are creating these products experiences for people, why not bring them in to design it for themselves? Because that's what we're doing now, right? Like we're creating our own experiences that benefit us and make us feel good. You know, why can't these people, the people who are experts in their mobility disability or whatever that is, come in and create their own experience to make them feel good? You know? Sorry, that was a weird loop.
No, I think you're right, though. Disabled people are often left out of the conversation about what disabled people need, which is incredibly counterintuitive. And I think a product of sort of the like paternalistic way that medicine has historically viewed its patients. And I hope now going forward, they'll be able to be part of that conversation in a more important way, I guess, in a more effective way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to a talk from the AARP, and I remember one of the panelists had mentioned that every company that's making products for a senior citizen should have a second CEO, a chief elder officer. So like someone in that age range that like they're building the product for. Because like you see, you know, like the product team or like the board or something, and they're all like middle-aged white men. And it's like, well, what insights could you have if you're not like focusing on user-centered design or having someone with that unique perspective like informing those decisions?
Mm-hmm.
I had some questions that are not necessarily related to this paper, but comments. So Christina, do you think, I think the example of glasses is amazing and I hadn't even thought of that. Do you think that the reason why it became so stylized, the style was so important, is because it became a commodity? Because so many people have like problems with their vision that like glasses became ubiquitous, and that style is only a product of like a commonization, I guess. I don't know what the word is.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know a ton about the history of eyeglasses, so I don't know for sure. I would imagine that part of it is that a lot of people need them.
Mm-hmm.
And so by virtue of that, you get more people who are interested in creating a product that they're interested in. And I think also on the other hand, you have sunglasses, which people who don't need prescription lenses still wear. So you get some forward movement in design and in aesthetics from that side that then transfers over to the necessary assistive device. I don't know, because like I can remember even when I was a kid, like 4 eyes was still a thing, where the glasses were ugly and they were like big, and kids would get made fun of for having glasses. And it seems like sometime in the last 20 years, maybe that shifted. And I don't really know what that is. I mean, maybe it's just like kids got nicer. But I feel like you don't really hear about that type of teasing as much anymore.
Well, have you ever considered the fact that the access to the resource has been minimized? Like the barrier of entry is so much lower now. Like if you look at the state of New York, state of Chicago, sorry, the state of New York and city of Illinois, sorry, City
City of
of Illinois,
Chicago.
and they're providing free glasses to all kids, K
Mm,
through 12, right? Like that barrier has been demolished, and now it's an equalizer, right? So at that point, the cost to produce them is super low. You know, you can get glasses within 24 hours, custom made. So now
mhm.
the technology has caught up to us to the point where people just want them. You know, so it's like this is just a new fashion accessory because it's a commodity. You know, so it's an
Yeah.
interesting intercept because it's a weird like parabola where you see like the the downward slope of cost, right? And then the commodity that reach up to it, we're like at that right intersection point where people want them and they're cheap enough to buy. You know,
Mhm.
it's like AirPods or like some sort of like Bluetooth technology. Like people want them because they're cheap and they're cool and they look cool.
But I'm wondering is if you create something too niche, like an assistive technology, if it's too niche, are you able to create something stylish? Are you able to have these, what this paper is arguing as a necessity and others may regard as a luxury? Is it possible now, or do we have to wait for a time in which the costs are so low that we can, this is like maybe an affordance?
I think that depends, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
we're in such a beautiful age where people will pay fucking anything for the experience. You know what I mean? So there are people with the capital to buy these things, but if we're looking at it from the people who can actually afford them, I think we need to break it down by what is the actual like the local income for people with disabilities, and can they actually afford these custom services? You know, are they able to actually get the things that they want designed for them and buy them? And I think the paper also stresses like we need to really put the individual in the center of design and how we're creating these experiences, because when we create the experiences we're doing it for the masses, right? We create a beautiful UI, we expect everybody's going to know this is beautiful, this is associated with this brand, you know, there's enough white space with for the characters to live on. That's just appreciated because it's widely perceived by people who can see, right? So I think at that point there needs to be I don't know, some sort of realization that to provide good experience for everyone, there has to be no associated cost with it. You know, and I think this paper illustrates, and you have it up right now, good design is not costly, it's worthy. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But that actually brings me up to the second comment. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate this conversation. If someone wants to jump in, please do. Um, but that brings me to another thing. I was reading Kevin Kelly's book. He's the editor of Wired. It's called I forget, Inevitables. But he was saying how UI and the stress towards UI now is because network effect has never been as important. So in other words, like we have access, like Sears was a distribution company. They had access to everyone that wanted to sell. And then now we have access to everyone that wants to buy. So if you want people, if on the consumer side, if you want them to engage in your platform or product, then you have to have a user experience that compels them to continue to use your product or
Mhm.
over a competitor. That UI essentially, like the commoditization is access to individuals. And so that's where style comes in. Like UI is important because the people are commodified. Access to people is commodified. Um, it's built for the masses because we have access to the masses now.
I mean, I think when you're talking about medical devices, though, that becomes complicated because when you go in to get a wheelchair or you go in to get a hearing aid, it's generally covered by insurance. I mean, depending on what your condition is, but usually it's covered by insurance. And so there's like an added complication in there that's really you don't have access as a company to everyone who wants to buy. You have access to insurers who have access to everyone who wants to buy. And so there's like an extra level of convincing that you would have to do in order to get insurance to buy into the idea that an aesthetic experience has value for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think, again, there's sort of a cost factor in there, because I can imagine if you could get hearing aids to be inexpensive enough that you could just like buy them on Amazon the same way that you can like buy glasses from CVS or whatever, that would also impact how aesthetics plays into this. But as it is right now, it's sort of like the cost of the device is so expensive that the aesthetics of it don't play a part, if that makes sense.
Right, and I think that touches base on the idea of functional requirements, like the minimum functional requirements for an idea or a product to be a viable thing. But we only do that to the point where we only provide absolutely the lowest rung of necessity, right? We don't do the upper echelon because it's like, well, it doesn't need to look pretty, it needs to be functional. Well, it's like, no, like I think again, this paper stresses, it's like there's an added emotional connection to the experiences that we have, right? If something isn't visual appealing, it's going to inhibit the way we perceive ourselves, and it's going to be in theory, a cost to, let's say, for example, the insurers, right? Because at that point, there's social cognitive behavioral issues. There's perception issues that can lead to depression. There's all of these factors that go into it. But the reason why these things are not addressed because the minimum functional requirements, right? Like if they say you're missing a leg, we're going to give you a prosthetic. This is the cheapest one that we can afford within this tier because that's what your insurance covers, right? Well, for a couple $100 extra, you can get like the titanium, whatever that is, right, out of your pocket for cost. But at that point, they're already satisfying the need for your minimum functionality, right, to be able to walk if you did walk at some point in your life. So I think the idea between insurers or these product designers has to shift from like the overall experience that we have for these people. Like when they make prosthetics for kids, right? They're no longer just making these like generic prosthetics. Now people are making these cool open source like casts that are like made out of Legos or 3D printed or are made of carbon fiber because they see the value of giving a great emotional experience to these kids because it will affect them into their adulthood. Wow, that was long-winded.
Oh yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. Were there any highlights in the beginning that you wanted to talk about, Vincent?
I thought in general, the idea of emotion being a big seasoning, within the experiences that we have is very important. Like have you guys heard of Alinea or Grand Chaz? If you ever watch Chef's Table on Netflix, watch it. It talks about this idea of nostalgia being a seasoning within his courses, right? But that ties into this emotional appeal of being able to go experience sadness with your food, and it kind of touches base with what we talked about last week, where being able to have these additional layers to experience something, right? Emotional experiences are far up the ring, and that's why we purchase them. So ideally, like how can we ensure that the emotional experience for everything that we're creating or being or touching at this time, how can we improve that for all people equitably? Is that the word?
Yeah.
So I think, long story short, how can we utilize emotion more and make that an equitable experience?
Yeah, I think they shed a good, very top level explanation of its importance. I think a lot of the paper was kind of redundant.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I understand. I would have liked to see maybe like a case study or how exactly they go over it in the last paragraph about those pair of scissors, but which are cool. I looked them up. They're made so that you can't like cut your finger. Yeah, the blade is like rounded. The blade is like in the center of like a larger rounded thing, so like it's hard to get your finger inside it, which is cool. Um, yeah, I think like a little more granular explanation of like these concepts application would be really helpful, and something that I would expect more out of like an article that was like published in 2015. Applied human factors in yeah, at like a conference for ergonomics.
Yeah, I'm curious to know like what is out there currently that maybe has incorporated more motion. Like one example that came to mind for me while I was reading it, I don't know if you're familiar with Microsoft, I think 2 years ago did a whole campaign to create adaptive controllers
Mm.
for kids with disabilities, and they showed it during the Super Bowl. And I thought that was a really great example of how they approached the task. They actually brought the kids in for all the user testing, and they were able to share that emotional experience of gaming with their friends. And I just thought that was a really great example of how they connected everything together that was somewhat highlighted in this article.
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah,
example.
I've seen some cool ones, mostly focused, well, I've seen some cool ones mostly focused on aesthetic design. So like overlays that you can put on wheelchairs, or like helmets that kids have to wear that look like different like superheroes helmets that they really like, stuff like that. One of my favorite assistive devices though that I've seen is ones for people with Parkinson's disease. There's like a whole slew of products that have come out that correct for shaky hands,
I've
so
seen
that
like
you can,
spoons.
yeah. The spoons I think are the most popular one, but I saw last week an entire makeup line that
Oh
came out where
wow.
all of the tools are specifically designed so that if you have shaky hands, it corrects for it. So you can do like eyeliner and stuff like that. Um, and I guess we'll see like how many people like that and if it works or not. But I think that's such a great idea.
That's amazing. I
Yeah,
mean, you think about inclusion within like something as simple as makeup, right? You look at Rihanna's Fenty line and having to have all these shades for people who
Mm-hmm.
are not, a lighter color, that's amazing. So having like further inclusivity with people to be able to apply makeup, like that's something that we just don't think about and we take for granted. So that is just good design. Like regardless if it takes off, having that option for people is just like, well, you've covered a section of the gamut of people with special needs, and not special needs like cognitive abilities, but special needs like this is a very specific thing that I need, which I think is a weird
Well,
term too.
yeah. Well, and what I like about that one too is that it was designed with people who have Parkinson's in mind, but it's something that like I think I saw it on Reddit, and like if you scroll through the comments, you see all sorts of people who are like normally abled, I guess, able-bodied, who were saying, "Oh, I could really use this because I have like a tremor in my hand that like is benign, but it's really annoying. I can never like do my eyeliner right." Or like, shoot, I always screw it up at the last second. I always screw up the flick. And this would be a super useful product for me. And I think there's sort of a sweet spot there, where you create products that are for people who have special requirements, but make them accessible to people who don't, so that they don't come with that stigma of being something that's for people who are like disabled. It's a product that's for people with a specific need, whether that's because of a disability or whether it's just that like they're really bad at doing their eyeliner, you know?
yeah, absolutely. I think that like 100%. And if it doesn't fit their need, and like for example, you have a tremor in your right hand and you don't use it to to use apply your eyeliner, and it's almost like it's self-perpetuating. Like there's no way of like your brain like plasticity repairing or like getting the practice needed to like get those fine motor skills to repair. Like I'm thinking about like stroke recovery. Like if you're so frustrated with like the use of your left hand that you never use your left hand, then you're never going to actually get better. And so it's like this never, like you're just going to continue and to get like to degenerate and never really yeah, get the benefits of those things. So yeah. So how can we apply this to like VR, XR?
Well, I think the most obvious problem with VR and XR that I've been seeing is like some VR headsets don't fit over people's glasses. Like right away, that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
And I feel like not a lot of VR companies are really interested in fixing it. They'll say like, "Oh, just take your glasses off." And it's like, well, if you do that, you're really lessening this experience. Because like already in virtual environments, oftentimes it's hard to get things to look clear. And I can only imagine how much more difficult that is when things don't look clear to you without glasses anyway. And it seems like that's a giant population that's just not really being considered here. And that's just like scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of like accessibility issues. Like I'm sure you can't really, maybe you could. I was gonna say, I'm sure you can't use like walking VR if you're in a wheelchair, but maybe you could. I don't know if it could track you.
Probably.
I mean, I think it could with the sensors if it's boxed in, right? But I think this is a good example of, the issues with having like a special need, right? And a product being able to accustom himself to it. Like it would be interesting to see if Oculus or Magic Leap was able to actually bring in people who are experts in facial wear to actually design things for people with glasses. Like why wouldn't they bring in these experts to give the added benefit and encapsulate a whole consumer market of people that need to be able to see? I think that's also an important thing, because now if you think about it from an emotional component, people who have glasses and have had the bad experiences with VR probably don't want to experience VR anymore because they're like, well, it's not for me, you know? So it's like having that beginning intercept of having a good experience and a good emotional experience tied to your product is important. Yeah. Have you guys ever seen the Magic Leap devices or utilize them?
Yeah.
I've seen them, I haven't used them.
So I think this is a great example too of like, they fit just like glasses, right? In theory, they're supposed to adjust. I don't know if they plan to do that at some point, but from a product standpoint, like they're already demolishing a market of people who wear glasses, so they won't be able to experience it, and they're in the forefront in theory of this entire VR AR movement. Well, I'm probably putting my foot in my mouth, but that's what they say, because they're the blue whale of AR VR.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a fine way to describe them.
Yeah, have you guys seen Micah or Mika?
Mika? What about Mika?
This is awesome. Awesome. I interacted with Mika at SIGGRAPH this last year, and it was so good. So good. You like walk into the space, and it was definitely like obviously finely calibrated. Like you couldn't interact with this avatar very well, but this very human-like avatar walks into the room. She doesn't speak, but like she looks you in the eye and then like beckons you toward her. She like walks around the desk that was like perfectly calibrated in space, and then you guys build a collage together. and it was so bizarre, so bizarre. And it's just like, whoa, this is the future of like virtual humans and like interacting with AI. It is incredible. If you ever get a chance to try it, it's totally cool.
Dude, the
Virtual humans
polygons
are
on
super
her.
weird.
Yeah, like if you think about how a 3D model is made, the number of polygons are needed to make it functional, right? So it can exist in a 3D realm. Adding that poly mesh, or sorry, not the mesh, you can call it bump map mesh, whatever it is. It's so perfect on her. Like you can't fucking tell that she's a 3D model, and that's scary.
Yeah, it's
Holy shit.
super scary.
Yeah,
I mean, she's
virtual
so
humans
sweet.
are weird because they're creepy when they don't look good, but they're almost creepier when they do look good.
Yeah.
So there's not really a way to win right now.
It's so well done. And then another thing I was going to talk about assistive technologies was that OC6, the chief science officer at Oculus, unleashed or unveiled. Here, actually, let me share it with the timestamp. Unveiled this electronic focal lengths. So essentially, they can mimic not only like prescriptions, but also like the distance that an object appears to you in a given space, to essentially like completely change the way that we interact with VR space. And it kind of talked about what you're saying, Vincent. Like, how do we get someone that studies, optics and lenses and human perception, and then embed that into the next stage of like hardware. And so it's I'm not giving it justice, but if you look at this talk in the section that I just posted, it's Michael Abrash, OC6, The Future of VR. They're talking about some of their R&D that they're doing to get like really clear resolution on the images, but also like have it theoretically be adapted to people's prescription strength, which is what you're talking about, Christina, right? Like good design should not only like enable new people to use it, but have an added value for everyone else, which is sweet.
That's so sick. I love that.
Yeah.
Crazy. I think as they add more to these experiences, like I think it's great to add the visual field, because that's what VR and AR and MR are primarily targeting. But then you can also add adaptability for people with hearing impairments, like people who can only hear from one side or not from both, like either. So I think they'll continue to hopefully add on these kind of senses to help enhance the emotional expectations of these products. Micah's trippy though. Holy shit.
Yeah, it blew my mind.
Would you interact with it again, Max? Or
For
is it
sure.
okay?
Absolutely.
It didn't creep you out too much?
No, absolutely. It was just incredible, like how she there's a very natural interaction, and then it wasn't like she would look you in the eye and then look away at like a very specific time that felt very natural. Sometimes like some people that are trained to like look you straight in the eye is a little creepy sometimes. People that have too much eye contact. She had that balance like really, really, really well. And then she like scooted around like a table to like work past it, and it was just like really, really well done. So if you ever get an opportunity at a conference or something like that, like sign up for that to be number one, because it's mind blowing. Does anyone have any other input about the paper and how we can apply it to the stuff that we're building?
I think it's just one of those things where when designing a new product, you have to keep all people in mind, not just the people like you, or not just like the people that you regularly see. And I think even in the medical space, sometimes that gets lost.
For sure.
Well, we often think that in the medical space that the insurance will come up with a solution that's benefiting the user, right? So I think there needs to be more inclusion with designers to really know the impact of what the products that they're designing. You know, even from an industrial designer standpoint or a UI designer standpoint, like how it's really going to affect you, because you can't encapsulate the entire market. You can only encapsulate people that can run, to walk, or whatever your product is aimed at. It's just so interesting.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Lots of citation if you want to do extra digging.
I noticed one of them, the emotions, Damasio is actually a big professor at USC. Just tidbit that was cited in there.
Yeah, they do the he's at the Brain Creativity Institute.
Exactly.
Him and his wife are kind of like major names in emotional regulation and brain development. Maybe we should shoot him an email and her an email, and they can sit in one of our sessions.
Yeah.
One of these days, someone is going to join our session.
Okay, 2 weeks from now is the next session. I think I've done 2. Christina, Morgan, I think you're either up. Is any volunteers?
I think I've done 2.
I can do the next one.
Sweet.
All right, I got it.
So that brings us to what's the date there? April 1st.
Okay.
April Fool's Day.
Oh, down.
All right then.
Cool. Okay, thanks everybody. I'll post this up on YouTube probably tomorrow.
Cool.
All right, see you guys in 2 weeks.
Okay, take care, y'all.
I guess.
All right, bye.